So a couple of things, and this might seem a little bit random and all over the place, but I think it'll be helpful for you today and maybe also for yesterday too. First thing that's worth mentioning is the tone of voice that Jesus uses. Sometimes it seems pretty intense, like maybe even mean at certain points, but it's important to remember two things, specifically two different audiences that Jesus is writing to. The first is not Jesus is writing to, Mark is writing to, excuse me. Mark is writing largely to expose the hypocrisy of the religious teachers at the time. And at that point, the religious teachers were held in this high esteem, and he's trying to show his readers that they've been hypocrites. Like these are not the guys that have it right. And so Jesus has some pretty intense confrontation with these guys. The other group of people that Jesus is pretty rough with are the disciples. Now, if you remember on day one, like when we watched that first video, Mark was written by Mark, but the stories were handed to him from Peter, who was one of the disciples. And so what we see is Peter being brutally honest about his weaknesses and the weaknesses of his fellow disciples as he's telling Mark these stories. Like a lot of people would say this is the most self-effacing gospel of the four gospels because Peter's just like putting it all out there. He's like, yeah, no, we didn't get it. We like all along the way, we were screwing it up. And so a lot of that is exposed in the tone of voice that Jesus uses. But all that to say, like, it's important to remember that anytime you read tone of voice, it is always an interpretive decision, right? And if you think about how easily your tone of voice can be misunderstood in a text or in an email, like how much easier do you think it is to misunderstand someone's tone of voice when you're reading from a language that's dead, like Koine Greek is not used anymore, and it's translated into a language we're using today 2,000 years later. And I think it's important to not put too much weight in what you or me may at first read as like an intense tone of voice. It may not be there at all. And so that's worth saying. The other thing is in chapter 8, this is like the highlight of the book of Mark. In chapter 8, there's this weird miracle where Jesus half heals a guy. He's blind, and Jesus kind of heals him, and he's like, can you see? And the guy's like, kind of, but men are like trees. Like I can kind of see, but not all the way. And then he finishes healing him, and then the guy can see everything. And it's like, what's the point? Like, did he not put enough effort into it? Did it not work the first time? This is actually very intentional on the part of Jesus, and where Mark puts this is super intentional as well. What he's trying to do is explain the struggle that the disciples are having. Right before this, Peter says, like, you're the Christ, like, you're the Messiah, you're the guy. And they get it, but then they don't. And they get it, and they don't. And they kind of see, and they kind of don't. And this story is right smack in the middle to make that point. Like, they're in progress, these guys. And the thing I love so much about that is like, I feel the same way. Like there are points in my life where I'm like, whoa, this is so clear and it's so good. And I totally understand. And then like not long after that, it's like, no, actually, no, it doesn't make sense. And so if you have ups and downs, the great encouragement from Mark's gospel is like, it's always been like that. Even the people that were literally walking shoulder to shoulder with Jesus were struggling to figure out what's this all about and who is this guy? So if that's you, you're in good company. And the good news is that eventually things become a lot clearer for these people and they go on to change the world. Their lives become what they would have never thought that they could be. And the same could be true for you and for me if we stick with it and continue to ask these hard questions, continue to read, continue to think. And I think what will come from this is far beyond what we could ask for or imagine. So it's good news. So I hope that's helpful for you today, and stick with it, and I'll see you tomorrow.